Shushbox podcast, a safe space for self-expression, healing, and empowerment.
Brought to you by Kenyora, writer and artist.
Self-love and embodiment coach, Jacqueline Michelle.
And Sunita, founder of Shushbox, the wellness platform supporting survivors of sexual trauma. Hi everybody, we're back for another episode of the Shushbox podcast. Today's episode is hosted by me, Sunita, and we'll be joined by Kenyora Parham from End Rape on Campus. End Rape on Campus works to end campus sexual violence through direct support for survivors and their communities, prevention through education, and policy reform at the campus, local, state, and federal levels. So welcome, Kenyora.
Hi, Sunita. Thank you so much for welcoming me into your podcast. I'm happy to be here.
I thought we could maybe just kick things off by finding out a little bit more of how you actually got involved with End Rape on Campus.
Absolutely. So my path to becoming a part of End Rape on Campus isn't the typical traditional kind of story. My background really stems from being raised in a very maternal household from 3 generations, my great-grandmother, grandmother, my aunt, and my mom. And really what they had instilled in me was like this power of womanhood, resiliency, and community and family, especially for me being raised as the only child. And so, I was raised by my mom, who was a very young teenager at the time when she had me herself. And her main goal was to make sure that I didn't fall into that kind of cyclical, stereotypical teenage mom type of, phase that a lot of Black people within the Black community are looked at as in terms of that statistic within the Black community. And so she, if anything, really enrolled me in schools that she felt were good. She was an active parent in my education and really gave me the opportunity to choose where I wanted to go. And so figuring those things out for me was kind of like, I want to be here because I want to go where women are and, recognize that women are doing such great things and attributing to society in such a great way. So I ended up going to a women-centered college called Simmons University. And even prior to then, I was a girl participant in what's called Girls Incorporated, which essentially takes inner city girls from different communities and really exposing them to different walks of life and different things around their communities than they probably never have seen before, and really giving them opportunity to recognize that they're strong, bold, and smart. And so after being a part of that organization, went to Simmons, became a member of a sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And so really have been surrounded by a lot of women-centered spaces. Even when I transitioned from Simmons and went on to get my master's in social work at Boston University, I, as a full-time student, also started my career in another women-centered organization called Strong Women, Strong Girls. And that was a multi-generational program based on mentoring. So college women mentoring elementary school girls, and the college women being mentored by professional women. And so I just always knew that I wanted to have some sort of impact, positive impact on women and girls themselves, whatever that looked like, but just wasn't sure what that was. And so over the years, in my career, I've always also found myself in spaces that have been in predominantly white spaces, and where I've had to navigate through those pressures of being the only sole Black woman staff member. So I found myself always having to advocate for myself, especially when it comes to being understood. So over the years, I've grown into what that looks like unapologetically for me, but also recognizing that I've gone through my own trauma as a survivor myself. And my survivorship actually starts when I was a young child and also on the campus space. And so I think because of what my mother and my aunt and my grandmother had instilled in me, I was able to compartmentalize that for myself and recognizing that despite what I had to endure or what I had to observe or witness at a young age, I was able to figure out there has to be something there that I can create change for. So I think a combination of my own survivorship story, and I would even include organizational trauma that I've endured over my career, kind of propelled me into where I'm at now as the executive director of NREAP on campus, and actually didn't start as the ED. I started off as the chief of staff. And what that looked like was really me creating in a work environment that I never really had, and making sure that our former staff members were able to really propel in their own positions, especially towards, this much greater cause that we're a part of, as exhausting and, secondary trauma can play a role in as well. And so I find myself being on this path towards like women and girls and women in the intersections of their identities and kind of this like empowerment pipeline. And so despite myself being a survivor, I didn't have that kind of traditional, oh, this is what happened to me, and went through my Title IX office and went through those kind of procedures. That wasn't something that was talked about in my community. My mom, I think, did a good job of trying to have those conversations and making sure that I didn't go through what she did. But I still didn't feel like I had enough of those types of resources to really guide me about like, oh, this is actually what happened to you. This is how you recognize these signs, and, really have, even that community space. I think I really just kind of took myself out of that space and just focused on the positive of like, this is what happened. We went through the trauma, but this is how we're going to get over that. But now being in this space, it's a bit like helping other people in their own healing journey with resources that I didn't have to say, because I didn't have these, let me give all of what I know to you. So you don't have to deal with what I have dealt with. So it wasn't necessarily a linear path, but a very much a path that I think was just based off of, resiliency and a multi-generational kind of survivorship.
Wow, what a journey. I love how you was explaining that, and thank you so much for sharing with us, obviously, your experiences and the empowerment pipeline. I feel like that is, we talk so often about empowering women and feeling empowered, but you're so right, it's a pipeline. You don't just wake up one day and feel empowered. It's a process, and I think it's super powerful, you using your experiences to provide the things that weren't there when you were going through what you went through. So I think it's super inspiring, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's helping a lot of people, like you say, and the more conversations we can have around these things, and in various communities, it is still an uncomfortable conversation. And that is the whole reason we're having this conversation now. We're probably both working in this space because we might have experienced that feeling of not being able to speak your truth.
Exactly.
So speaking the truth. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Really interesting to hear. And yeah, you're doing amazing work. So thank you. So with that experience, going on to the work that you're doing at, can I abbreviate it, by the way? Is it EROC? Does anyone say that? EROC, no.
Erock.
Erock, okay. So I'm going to call it Erock. Erock, that's quite cool, actually. Okay, so with your experiences and obviously how you got into Erock, what would you say is the mission of Erock?
Yeah, so you actually said it at the top of the call about us really ending sexual assaults by providing direct support for student survivors in their communities, prevention through education, policy reform on the local, state, federal levels. But our vision entirely is that we envision a world in which each individual has an educational experience that is free from violence. And until then, that all survivors are believed, trusted, and supported. And we do this through a new framework. So back in 2017, we actually started what was called Centering the Margins. Centering the Margins really focused on amplifying the voices of those students who were at the intersections of their identities. So those who were historically underserved, historically excluded, and systemically marginalized from this campus anti-rape space. And so what I have done is essentially taken that initiative and moved it towards as a framework for how we do the work. So it's not a program in and of itself. It's actually the lens in which we do our programs and our initiatives moving forward. So that means that anything that we do, and which I'll talk about in the podcast, it will stem through that CTM framework lens. And the aim of that is to support, educate, prevent, and ultimately end sexual violence against these marginalized communities.
Centering the margins, it's so important. And when we're having these discussions that already in society are so uncomfortable and awkward, that everybody's included. It's so different within different communities. My background, I'm Asian. It's our communities, it's definitely not something that's openly spoken about. So understanding the nuances, I think, of these different communities and bringing that all into a structure, like you're saying, is, again, so important. It's one thing speaking about it, but then understanding, I think, each culture, each community, and how things are processed and how things are discussed.
Exactly. And it's also because of the fact that, with the current COVID-19 pandemic we've endured, we also have seen, like, within the political climate, this kind of heightened awareness surrounds systemic oppression. And then, of course, wanting to pay homage to the Me Too movement and Tarana Burke and her foundation for that, because I think through her work, she really paved the way to say, hey, there are Black women and women who are at the intersections of their identities that are not being talked about in this movement that we need to talk about. And we also need to talk about the intersections that play a role in sexual violence. It's not always about rape or sexual harassment or sexual assault or a combination of the above. It's also about police brutality. It's about, voting suppression rights. So we have to recognize that there's also this intersectional framework and lens in order to really get to the root of the matter and truly make that change that we seek to make on college campuses.
So something else I know that you do a lot of work on is the red zone. And this is a big topic of conversation and issue that's happening now with campuses. So I thought we could talk a bit more about what the red zone is.
Absolutely. So the red zone is essentially a period of time from August to November where more than 50% of campus sexual assaults occur between that time period. This is a time when students essentially are returning back to campus, and at the end of the first week of classes, where we're seeing the highest prevalence rates of campus sexual assaults occurring. And what we've noticed, especially through research, is that freshmen have actually reported to be the highest rates of unwanted sexual misconduct. And that the reason that has attributed to this kind of heightened, not kind of, but heightens occurrence or uptick is due to more socializing that's happening, less work that's happening, more free time, and heavier drinking. because we know that at the beginning of, the semester, that's where we're seeing a lot of partying happening, a lot of, students engaging in peer pressure situations. Students come to campus for the first time, especially freshmen. And then, of course, what we know, because we're coming off of the heels of COVID-19 and also entering that Delta variant, some schools are coming back from virtual learning to in-person learning. And so what we fear is that both the freshman class and the untraditional sophomore classes are essentially coming together who have not undergone any college, like that in-person college experience, is going to attribute to the uptick and that unwanted sexual assault. And so we believe that during this year, this particular red zone year, it's actually going to double. So we have actually named that double red zone.
It's a sad reality that that's the case. You would hope it was the opposite. People are coming out into society and being more aware of how they're behaving. But, like you just explained, a lot of people will be doing the opposite and not thinking about their actions as integrating back into society. You would hope that people are integrating in the right way, but
Exactly. And, it's unfortunate that we even have to do these things. But it's something we have to do, right? Like we're talking about students who are entering into college campuses to receive an education on specific programs or majors that they're a part of, but they're also getting equipped especially through our organization, as well as our partner organizations that are also doing this work, with other educational programming and opportunities to really talk about, what they're not talking about. What does it mean to have healthy relationships? What does it mean to be an active bystander? What does it mean to intervene? What does it mean to support, your fellow peers who have experienced, a sexual assault or harassment that occurs on or off campus? What does it mean to really even celebrate those who have endured that experience and are, if anything, navigating through their survivorship journey? And it's not linear. It's not like, this, A to B type of trajectory. It's going to always be all over the place. But what does it look like to celebrate someone who's going through that? And, equip them with not only the resources to navigate through those pathways, but also to inform and empower them to pursue, long-term impactful modes of advocacy for not only themselves, but also for their peers. And so we're aiming to enter into this new red zones in partnership actually with the Every Voice Coalition to really dive deep into and respond to the double red zones through a 15-week Reclaiming the Double Red Zone campaign, which will be focusing on exactly what I've just mentioned in terms of educating and equipping students with tools and resources with regard to self-care, sustaining awareness and education around the red zone, as well as what does it look like to advocate on a campus and federal level.
Again, I was going to ask you, how could we be more proactive in raising awareness? But obviously the work that you're doing and this 15-week plan that you have in place, working with universities and, is this nationwide, or where are you doing the 15-week plan?
Absolutely. So this is nationwide, and it's a digital social media campaign. So we'll be posting up a number of different resources and ways in which folks can get involved through what we're creating as like a true college syllabus in a way, to really, speak to the students. And they get to essentially pull from the different weeks that we'll have ready for them to, say, oh, well, there's a resource on, what it means to navigate through trauma. And that's something that I need right now, versus waiting until the following week. So it'll be a fully flushed out syllabus that students will have. And pretty much every week, we're going to be either highlighting some of those resources, highlighting what we're doing collectively with the Every Voice Coalition, and also highlighting what we're doing as separate entities doing this work as well. So we have a number of great things coming down the pipeline too.
Definitely a lot of things to look out for. And, even though it is going to be the predicted, like you say, double red zone, on the flip side of it, there's a lot of content and work and preventative measures taking place to obviously raise awareness and, educating people on how to access the content.
Absolutely. And it's for everyone. And, it's students centered, students in mind, but it's really for, educating everyone who may not even be aware of what the red zone is. And that's one of the main points too. One of our main goals to make sure that we do is to spread that awareness, because the more people you can educate, the more change.
Definitely. It's all education, isn't it? Do you think there's more in general, just speaking, do you think there is more that colleges and universities can be doing themselves, or?
I think it's a good question that you asked, right? Like, in terms of our campus administrators, what can campuses be doing for students? And what it starts with is what is not working? What are they not doing for their students? And not just survivors. I mean, students, period. How are they not connecting with the holistic sense of self of the student, their identities that they're coming in with, maybe even where they're at in terms of their understanding and ways of the world, and how can they meet students where they're at, and also provide their students with the necessary resources that aren't just like hidden away on the opposite side of campus, and the only way you would know about it is because word of mouth, right? Like, orientation matters. And there's a reason why there's a freshman orientation, because you want to give your students a sense of like, here's why you're here. We're proud for you to be here. But also, yes, you're going to be here. And let's also talk about what may occur and some of the resources that we have available for you, because we want you to know that you're entering into this new world of opportunity, new worlds of experiences that most of you probably, hopefully, have never had, in terms of the negative experiences. But also, like, we're not only just trying to prepare you to be the next generation of leaders outside of these 4 years that you come to this college, but also let's prepare you to be just a consenting adult and someone who respects others in their sense of bodily autonomy. Like, to me, sex education doesn't just start and end in high school. It should actually start from K through 12 all the way through to higher education. And it doesn't have to be like this raw kind of talk in the education on the elementary level. You start off, very developmentally where the students are at so they can understand those things. And then as they get older, you can have more of those pronounced conversations. But I think we need to, it's just ironic to me that we have educational institutions that are not educating. And that's the issue there. It's like, yes, you have these programs that the students were attracted to, and that's great. But let's also talk about the here and the now and what's going to happen, or hopefully doesn't happen, because you have these preventative measures in place and these resources that these students can utilize. And then let's also talk about, the partnerships that exist not only within the college spaces, but like the central players that play a role, like the campus safety, public safety or police officers, or the local department that the school is teaming up with, or the resource center that they may have on their campus, or, that may be located off campus, like a rape crisis center, or any, and I'm even talking about beyond sexual assault. What are some resources that if there's a student who's coming to the school from a very faith-based perspective, let's say they identify as Muslim, why not provide them with, here's like some of the temples that are around the area that you can also go to, because they may be looking for that. You know what I mean? So it's not just about centering sexual assault. But I do think sexual assault needs to be a part of the conversation, and bringing in the intersectional identities that students are coming in with, especially because most of these schools are global universities and colleges that are getting students from different, not just the United States, but different parts of the world coming to their campus. So I think there has to be this kind of global sense of understanding an intersectional lens, and one that's not afraid to have that conversation around sex. Like, let's talk about it. Sex. Like, just let's talk about it.
Sex. Yeah, you're so right. And, sex education doesn't need to just be about reproduction or STIs, or preventative measures. The reason, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that plays a part, I think, in sexual violence and, these issues that we're talking about is the lack of education and the lack of conversation. So again, zooming out to just look at how in society sex education and sex is discussed, this whole taboo and secretive and, hush hush kind of mentality around it is playing into the issue, it's feeding into the problem. So it's just about opening the lid from a young age, like you say, it doesn't have to be, it's meeting the students where they're at, it's meeting people where they're at every stage of life. And the younger we can have these conversations about consent, about, body autonomy, like you were saying, the earlier we can be having these conversations and not just parking the conversations at a certain point. It's about developing the conversations. And it should actually, thinking about it, these types, the work that you're doing, obviously it's amazing that you're doing this 15-week program, but university and campuses, they should be offering this, they should be highlighting this should be part of the education system.
Absolutely. And I'll just add that, I came across a study this morning that talked about toxic masculinity, particularly when we're talking about the Disney princess culture, and how that if you start showing these elements of like children who engage with the princess culture at a younger age will have progressively more positive attitudes towards women if they're able to embrace that princess culture that is subscribed to, not just around like the woe is me and damsel in distress pieces, but also the other, princesses that are like saving the day and, are seen as heroes. But if you're able to show even, young children, regardless of how they identify, those different types of pieces that are ingrained in the princess culture, they actually said that it might do your child more good in the long run to have less of that toxic masculinity, because they've been essentially exposed to the princess culture, which will also help them to express their emotions much better in relationships. And so in having those conversations with your child about like what they are seeing, but not shielding them from that princess culture that is there. So it's interesting. And I bring that up to say it's like, there are things that can be done on the most educational, like, primary school level that can basically transcend all the way up until adulthood. So there's so much that can be done in order for us to truly change the culture around toxic masculinity, rape culture, and even racism and other systems of oppression.
Yeah, start early. It's just really down to education. People don't just wake up and see the world this way. It's it's like you're saying, it's systemic, it's learning, it's society, it's these things in place that almost develop these issues. They are making the issues, really. So something I wanted to ask is about survivors who might have had an experience, previous years on campus and they're heading back to school. Do you have any advice or Do you do any work around that?
Yeah, so survivors who may be entering back on campus, especially after this COVID-19 and being at home or being in even domestic violence situations, and have the opportunity to come back to campus full time. A piece of advice I would say is, finding that person or group of people as people they can lean on, their community folks, finding even a campus administrator or faculty or staff that they can trust, who will be able to provide them with, or even if it's just being an ear, and someone that they can lean on, but also someone who's not afraid to, help them and support them and get them the resources they need. But also even their peer group, finding someone who within their peer group that they can talk to, and, not be afraid to have conversations about what's going on for them, what may trigger them. Not everyone has to come back to campus talking about what their experience has been, but I think if they can find people that they're comfortable with, that they can trust, who understand, what they're walking with, I don't think a survivorship journey has to always be alone. You can have people along the way with you. Like, yes, you're going to navigate through your emotions and how you show up in the world by yourself. But I think if you have other people who are there to support you, you're not going to feel as isolated and alone, because you have other people you can speak to. I would also add that making sure that you do take the opportunity to engage in the resources on your college campus, especially the counseling center or the health center that is there. And if your college campus, unfortunately, isn't doing the right by you in terms of the resources and the mental health resources that you need, we do actually help students find particular mental health and even legal resources if they need that. And so we're able to figure out, if you're a student who identifies as transgender, and you happen to be also from a community of color, we'll help you find a local therapist in your area. We'll help you find, the right legal firm if you're looking to figure out how to navigate through this Title IX space that we have. And so, Unrape on Campus can certainly serve as that resource for students, in helping them navigate through just anything, really. And one thing I'll mention too is we are actually launching what we're calling a campus accountability map and tool. This tool will essentially provide students, family members, faculty, pretty much friends, anyone, policymakers, with the ability to compare and contrast different sexual assault statistics, prevention efforts, and survivor support resources that exist on the colleges and universities in the United States. And so this gives folks an idea of where colleges are at in terms of their reporting statistics, as well as what they offer on their campus, how they define certain definitions of sexual assault or consent, as well as helping students navigate through that Title IX process and what they should know when they're going through that process, as well as, if a student just experienced sexual assault and they want to get a rape kit done, what they should know when they go in for that. So that particular platform is, a piece that we're looking to serve as a digital solution, not the digital solution, but at least a resource that puts the power back in the hands of students and survivors in their communities, to help them not only navigate through their experience, but also to help hold their schools accountable. And it's that sense of transparency that is most needed. Because we know that a lot of students are, trying to navigate through the Title IX space specifically, and, they're not getting the answers that they need from the questions that they're asking, or, no one's being as proactive in terms of providing those resources. an understanding of how to navigate through that process that is human-centered and survivor-centered. So we're looking to change that.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've covered quite a lot of things there. Is there anything else we should be looking out for from Erock in the next 12 months, maybe?
Yeah, so even actually just this fall, we're actually going to be launching a new program that is for student survivors specifically. And it's called Student Survivor Caucus. And it's going to pilot with about 25 students from marginalized backgrounds from 25 different colleges and universities, where they get to be at the table and build the table in terms of understanding how Title IX and other intersectional civil rights laws intertwine, learning about the history of sexual violence, ways in which that they can mobilize and make change on their respective campuses and maybe their regions, and come together in terms of creating a national action plan that is created by those student survivors themselves through the equipment that we'll be able to provide through a very intersectionally centering and very intentional curriculum that we're creating to really help equip these students, survivors with what they need. It's almost like a train the trainer kind of piece, but it's a year-long kind of fellowship, if you will. But through this kind of lens of a caucus, so being like a representative of their college and really being a voice, for their peers. So it's going to be a fun time. We're still in the development for that. But yeah, we got that coming down the pipeline as well.
The Shushbox podcast is brought to you by the team at Shushbox. We are a wellness platform created by survivors for survivors. For more information, head to www.shushbox.com and check us out on Instagram @_shushbox.